Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Let's look now at another thing that kind of comes out of this. So if we're focusing on this, what are we trying to work out? If we're not working out the body, well, Epictetus talks about rationality. Sometimes he calls it the will, faculty of choice, and he calls this the ruling part as well. Let me do another thing here. So this is all right. Finally, all set up. Okay, so here's a question that you can ask yourself. That we've looked at a couple times in this ethics class. What is the most important part of you? What is the best part of you as a human being, as a person? And Epictetus has an answer for this. And it's kind of similar to the one that Plato and to a lesser extent Aristotle had. It's this rational part of you, the part that's distinctively human. You have other parts of you that are more animalistic, that you share in common with the other animals. Even to some degree with the plants, I mean, plants breathe, you breathe. That's not what makes you human. This ruling part is where we actually have the possibility of changing our opinions, our judgments, our desires, our ways of looking at things. So you notice I placed desires and aversions down here, but they are really tied in with this as well. And so are our beliefs and our opinions and our judgments. You're going to have desires and aversions and beliefs and judgments from the start, by the time that you start thinking about these things. The question is, what are you going to do with them? Are they good enough as they are? Should you just follow them and try to make them work out as best you can? Or should you actually call them into question and think about whether they're the right beliefs to have, the right desires to have? And he talks about this, not so much in the Enchiridion, but in the Discourses. He says, there we go. Oops. What's a person? What's a human being? So one of the classic definitions is a rational animal. So he says, by the rational faculty, what are we separated from? Well, from the other animals, right? So he says, from wild beasts. From what else? What are other kinds of animals? We have wild animals.
Domestic animals.
Domestic animals, right. And now he's being very metaphorical here, but this is kind of good to keep in mind. He says, take care then to do nothing like a wild beast. But if you do, you've lost the character of a human being. You've not fulfilled your promise. See that you do nothing like a sheep, but if you do, in that case, the person is lost. What is it to act like a sheep? Now, it doesn't mean just to follow, in conformity. We often talk about sheep that way, right? Oh, the person's a sheep. They just accept everybody else's opinions. It's not just that. It has to do with your desires. He says, when we act gluttonously, when we act lewdly, rashly, inconsiderately, what have we declined to? So when we're acting in ways in which we just follow our, basic desires, he says, gluttonously, what is gluttony about?
Pie.
Yeah, more broadly.
Food.
If you're a glutton who's only obsessed with pie, then you're probably not that bad off. But yeah, food. Lewdly would be about, or lustily would be about, what?
Sexual desire.
Very good, sexual desire. When we act inconsiderately, that's more inattentiveness to other people. He says, what have we declined to? We're like sheep then. We've lost the rational faculty. When we act, now here's another different part of ourselves, when we act contentiously and harmfully and passionately and violently, what does that sound like? Doesn't that sound a lot like Plato's thumos? This part of us that gets angry, the part with which we get offended. If we indulge that, then what are we declining to? He says, to wild beasts. Consequently, some of us are great wild beasts and others little beasts. But if we do this, then the distinctively human part of us is being lost, bit by bit by bit by bit. Not all at once, but slowly over time, through habits. And he says, well, how do you actually maintain things? How do you maintain a flute or a lyre? In our case, we would probably say, how do you maintain a guitar or a piano? How do you preserve a horse or a dog? Well, you have to treat it the right way. You have to take the things that are distinctive about it and focus in on those and attend to those features and see that it gets the things that it needs. So, can you keep piano in good condition if you just, jump on it and bang on it all the time or like pour drinks into it? Probably not. Can you feed your dog on Cheerios and beer all the time? The dog will probably eat it. It's not going to be very good for the dog. I'm sure there's somebody who's done that somewhere. That's not the way you maintain it. You have to actually, look at what it is that you're trying to maintain and what's distinctive about it, and then exercise that part, and then feed that part. Well, what is it for a human being? He says, well, think about different kinds of human beings or different professions. How do you get better at carpentry? If you decide you want to be a carpenter. I'm not a very good carpenter because I don't do it very much, but I can do some, rough carpentry because my family's mostly tradespeople. How would I get better? Go to carpentry school?
Just do it.
Yeah, a lot of these things you actually learn. No, I could just do it. Wouldn't it be better if I actually did it with somebody who knew what they were doing, who could say, you're off there. Yeah, so you apprentice with somebody else. What about grammar? How do you learn grammar? Well, you apprentice with somebody who's a grammarian. If you want to learn philosophy, study with people who know philosophy. If you want to learn social work, study with some other people, right, who know something about social work. If you want to get good at a sport, yeah, there are coaches for that, right? If you're working with a coach and you're not actually getting better, there's probably something wrong with the coach. And you could go on and on with this. So what about this part of you that really makes you you? It says, if you want to develop that, you need to find the people who actually focus on that. And you need to exercise it, and you need to feed it. So let's look at some of the things that he says about this then, this ruling part. It says, of all the faculties, you'll find not one which is capable of contemplating itself, and they're not capable either of disapproving or approving. So if you think about grammar, for example, the grammatical art, you've all mastered that actually, because you can all write grammatical English sentences. Good. It hasn't been the case at other places I've taught necessarily. How much does that art, does that piece of you inside of yourself, that bit of knowledge, can grammar actually analyze itself? Can it look at itself? It can tell you whether you're in grammar or out of grammar, whether you're abiding by its rules or not abiding by its rules, right? Can grammar actually tell you whether you should study grammar? No, can it? Can carpentry tell you whether you should use carpentry? No. Can carpentry like rethink itself and figure out how it should change? No. It's making an assumption from the start. But you yourself, you're able to think about this. Should you be a carpenter? Should you learn carpentry? Should you study grammar? Should you work on this assignment or not work on this assignment? Should you take this class or not take this class? Should your life go in this direction or in this direction? Should you date this person or date this person or maybe not date anybody at all? Should you go on that trip or not? If you go on that trip, what are you deciding that you want to come out of that trip? Where are you going to decide to go on your day trips? All of those things you actually do decide, don't you? And it's not grammar or carpentry or even, I suppose, an art of traveling that decides that. It's this rational part of you. So he says, well, what faculty does actually, tell you about what you ought to do? The one that contemplates itself and other things. If you haven't thought up until this point about whether your life is going in the right direction or whether you have the right habits or whether your beliefs and your desires are in line with reality or not, or likely to disappoint you, if you haven't done those things, then you're not using this to its full capacity yet, Epictetus would say. That's the bad news, but the good news is you can actually do this. If you decide at this point in your life that you want to do something different with your life, you want to make your life focus, you've previously focused it around, say, enjoyment, pleasure, and now you want to focus it on something that you consider to be better, that's within your faculty of choice, isn't it? And you can actually understand that. That's part of this rational faculty. So he says, the rational faculty examines itself, what it is, what power it has, and what is the value of this. And it examines all the other things. So what should you do with it, he says? Well, this ruling part has sort of preconceptions about what's good or bad, what's right or wrong, what's rational or irrational. And the goal is to get those right. So the first thing that you have to do with it is actually look at what do you think about these things. And you probably have to do that in action by observing yourself over time. It's not something you can sit down and do as an assignment one time for all. Once you've actually started doing that, quite often you'll notice mistakes or blemishes or blind spots or sort of errors in your understanding of what's good and bad, right or wrong, rational or irrational. You'll also observe it in other people too. And once you start doing that, that gives you an incredible freedom, because you can say to yourself, "Hey, do I want to stick with this? Do I want to keep doing things, thinking about things this way?" So you can take your desires. You can't change them just like that and say, "Oh, I'm not going to desire this anymore." But you can actually ask yourself, is this desire a rational one for me to have? Is this desire one that's likely to lead me to unhappiness, or to the chance of unhappiness? Or is this a desire that's actually good for me to have? If it's a desire that's bad for you to have, how do you change your desires? Well, you change the way that you think about things. You change the way that you view things and judge them. So, again, that's the rational faculty sort of purifying itself, getting itself back on track. You don't start out with a rational faculty, Epictetus would say, that's completely rational. That's completely in line with the way it could be and ought to be. It's something you have to work on over time, over the course of your life. That's probably enough about the rational faculty for now.